We often think about history and, the big famous names just stick. But sometimes you hear about figures who did, well, similar things, but they just fade away. Why does that happen?
That's a great question, isn't it? History isn't just facts, it's also about memory. What we choose to remember and how. And that's rarely straightforward.
So today we're doing a deep dive into someone exactly like that, Dou Xian. He's from China's Eastern Han Dynasty.
Right. And based on the historical sources we've got, his military record is seriously impressive, on par with legends like Qing and Qubing.
Exactly. Our sources detail these huge campaigns against the Northern Xiongnu.
The same enemy Qing and Qubing fought. Big northern campaigns. And get this, Dou Xian was actually given the title Champion Marquis.
No way. The same title as Qubing.
The very same. I mean, you can't really get a bigger stamp of military approval than that in the Han Dynasty.
Okay, so that's the setup. Same enemy, huge victories, even the same top title. But here's the mystery we want to unpack. Dou Xian just isn't remembered like those other guys. He's not nearly as famous or respected.
Precisely. So our mission here, looking at the texts we have, is to figure out why. Why the difference? Because the sources, well, they don't just talk about battles.
Right, they paint a much fuller picture, don't they? His personality, the politics, it's all in there.
Exactly. To understand why his legacy is so different, we need to look beyond the military stuff. The context of the Eastern Han court is crucial. And yeah, the sources give us plenty to work with.
Okay, let's get into it then. So our sources establish Dou Xian's position pretty clearly right off the bat. He's the older brother of Empress Dou.
Emperor Zhang's wife, yeah. That family connection is key.
So he's plugged right into the center of power from the start.
Absolutely. And Emperor Zhang's reign, well, the sources say he was pretty indulgent towards the nobility.
So that created an environment where someone like Dou Xian, the Empress's brother, could really thrive, or maybe abuse his position.
It seems like the latter. The texts describe him becoming quite tyrannical.
How so? What kind of things?
Well, things like ignoring the imperial family status, mistreating other members of the Liu clan, even stealing land and homes from princesses?
Stealing from princesses. Wow. Okay, so he wasn't exactly subtle about throwing his weight around. He clearly thought his family connection put him above the rules.
It really suggests that dynamic, doesn't it? Where closeness to the throne could be weaponized for personal gain, even against the emperor's own relatives.
Emperor Zhang did step in eventually, right? The source mentions a reprimand.
Yes, he did reprimand him. And Dou Xian backed off, but only temporarily, it seems.
His ambition didn't just disappear.
Not at all. Especially because Empress Dou's adopted son, Liu Zhao, who would become emperor, he was named crown prince.
So the Dou family saw their long-term power solidifying. That probably just encouraged him, didn't it?
It likely did. It cemented their influence for the foreseeable future, emboldening Dou Xian.
Okay, so this is where things get more complicated. The source introduces Zheng Hong, the Grand Commandant.
Yes, and he's presented as someone who saw the danger the Dou family represented very clearly.
He tried to warn the emperor.
Repeatedly. He warned Emperor Zhang about Dou Xian having way too much power, saying it could lead to serious trouble down the line.
Zheng Hong sounds like a voice of reason, trying to protect the dynasty.
He really does. A figure of integrity, pushing back against this rising power block. His warning showed just how serious the situation was perceived by some at court. He saw the long-term risks.
How did Dou Xian react to these warnings?
Oh, he hated him for it. The text says there was intense animosity.
Right. Then there's this specific incident. Zheng Hong accuses some of Dou Xian's allies, Zhang Lin and Yang Guang.
That's right, accuses them of bribery.
So a direct attack on Dou Xian's network.
Exactly. Zheng Hong was trying to chip away at his power base, expose the corruption.
But Dou Xian manages to flip it, doesn't he? Someone tips off Yang Guang about the report.
Yes, Yang Guang gets a secret heads up. And Dou Xian pounces on that.
How?
Instead of addressing the bribery, he accuses Zheng Hong himself of leaking the confidential report.
Wow. Complete deflection. Attack the accuser, not the accusation.
Classic manipulation.
Yeah.
He knew who really leaked it, or at least that Yang Guang was alerted, but he used the breach of protocol to discredit Zheng Hong and protect his own allies. Very cunning.
And Emperor Zhang bought it.
He was apparently furious about the leak, yeah. And he dismissed Zheng Hong from his post.
That's rough. What happened to Zheng Hong then?
Well, he surrendered himself voluntarily, and the emperor eventually released him. But when Zheng Hong asked to retire, the emperor said no.
But Zheng Hong didn't give up, did he? Even when he was ill.
No, his dedication seems remarkable. He sent this incredibly powerful memorial to the emperor.
What did it say?
It strongly condemned Dou Xian's wickedness, his abuses of power, and significantly, he compared Dou Xian to Wang Mang.
Wang Mang, the usurper. That's a heavy comparison.
Extremely heavy. It was the ultimate warning, saying Dou Xian's ambition could lead to the same kind of disaster, the overthrow of the dynasty. He urged the emperor to act decisively.
How did the emperor react to that?
The source says he was deeply moved, quite emotional. He even sent doctors to Zheng Hong.
But it was too late.
Tragically, yes. Zheng Hong passed away.
And with him gone.
The main check on the Dou family's power was removed. The emperor seemed worried about this too, according to the text. He'd also apparently been concerned about another official, Diwu Lun, being removed earlier. Now, with Zheng Hong dead, who could counter the Dou's?
Did he try anything?
He appointed Yanran as Minister of Works, seemingly hoping he could provide some balance.
Another attempt to contain them?
Yes, but as events unfolded, it wasn't enough.
Then, the big turning point. Emperor Zheng dies in 88 AD.
And just like that, the last real obstacle to the Dou family's total dominance is gone.
Interestingly, though, the source says Dou Xian's first moves weren't what you might expect, recommending talented people.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising. He started recommending capable individuals for court positions. It makes you pause and wonder, what was his game plan there?
Maybe trying to look responsible? Or maybe a flicker of something genuine?
Would be either, or both. But whatever the motive, didn't last long before his core ambition took over again.
Because now we have the young emperor, he, on the throne.
Barely 10 years old.
And Empress Dou becomes the Empress Dowager, the regent. She's effectively running the show.
Exactly. Yeah. And that meant her family, especially Dou Xian and his brothers, Dou and Dou Jing, rocketed up the ranks.
They got key positions.
Oh, yeah. High-ranking, influential posts right inside the palace. The Dou clan's power basically peaked at this point.
Total control.
Pretty much absolute control, with the Empress Dowager as regent. And that kind of concentration of power in one family, well, it's inherently risky, isn't it?
You'd think people would be worried.
And they were. The source mentions that even some people within Dou Xian's own circle started getting nervous about how fast and how high he was climbing.
Did anyone say anything to him?
Yes. One advisor wrote him a letter. A warning, basically.
What kind of warning?
Against arrogance. The advisor brought up history, examples of other powerful empresses' families who eventually fell hard.
Using historical precedent.
Right, referencing classics like the Book of Songs, the Book of Documents, pointing out how few families like his had actually lasted since Emperor Gaozu, the dynasty's founder. It was a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power.
Did Dou Xian listen?
His response seemed superficial. For show, perhaps. He recommended Deng Biao.
Who is Deng Biao?
A respected figure, but someone without real political muscle. Dou Xian made him grand tutor and put him nominally in charge of the secretariat.
So it looked like he was taking the advice, bringing in someone respected.
Exactly, but the source is pretty clear it was a manipulation. Deng Biao was just a figurehead.
A fart.
Essentially, yeah. To make Dou Xian's own actions look more legitimate, to keep the Empress Dowager happy. The text even compares it to how Wang Mang used Kong Guang.
Ah, another parallel to Wang Mang. So Deng Biao couldn't actually stop Dou Xian.
No, he had no real power to curb him. And Dou Xian's behavior just got worse.
How much worse?
The tyranny escalated. We're talking framing officials on false charges, having the sons of ministers murdered.
Good grief.
And targeting the imperial family itself again.
Is there a specific example?
Yes, a really brutal one involving Han Yu. Years earlier, Han Yu had been involved in a case against Dou Xian's father, Dou Xian.
Okay. So Dou Xian held a grudge.
A long and deadly one. Years later, Dou Xian tracked down Han Yu's son, murdered him, and apparently even presented the son's severed head at Dou Xian's grave.
That's horrific. The public reaction must have been intense.
Outrage and fear, you'd imagine. It was incredibly brutal, violating basic decency. But
nothing happened to Dou Xian.
Not immediately. Remember, the Empress Dowager was regent, and his power was immense. He seemed untouchable until the pivotal event, the assassination of Liu Cheng.
Who was he?
The Marquis of Dou Xian. Importantly, he was a member of the imperial Liu family, and he'd apparently become a favorite of the Empress Dowager.
Oh, so Dou Xian targets someone close to his own sister, the regent?
Yes. He had Liu Chang assassinated, right there in the capital, which was heavily guarded. He even tried to frame Liu Chang's brother, Liu Gang, for it.
Assassinating an imperial relative favored by the Empress Dowager in the capital. That's incredibly brazen.
It sent shockwaves. People were stunned and furious. This seemed to be the final straw.
For the Empress Dowager, too.
Absolutely. When she found out the truth, she was furious. Our source describes her rage, accusing Dou Xian of treason.
Treason? That's serious.
The ultimate crime. She ordered him confined within the palace walls.
So his power finally caught up with him. He's under house arrest, basically.
Yes. And the text says he was actually scared, maybe even regretful at this point, facing real consequences.
And then the story takes another twist, right? An opportunity arises.
Exactly. Just as he's confined and fearing the worst, a letter arrives. It's from the Xiongnu, the leader of the Southern Xiongnu.
What's it about?
It's about the Northern Xiongnu. The Xiongnu reports they're in a bad way, famine, internal fighting, really weak.
Okay.
And he proposes a joint military campaign. The Han Dynasty and the Southern Xiongnu together, striking the Northern Xiongnu while they're vulnerable.
Wow. Talk about timing. For Dou Xian, this must have looked like a lifeline.
A potential path to redemption, just when he desperately needed one. It was incredibly opportune.
The Southern Xiongnu wanted to ally with the Han against his own northern counterparts.
Yes, and he framed it very cleverly. He emphasized his loyalty to the Han, talking about repaying their generosity, food, clothing, gifts they'd received.
So positioning it as loyalty and gratitude.
Exactly. And also as a way to secure the northern border for the Han. He even laid out a detailed military plan, suggesting specific Han commanders like Geng Bing and Deng Hong, plus governors.
He sounds like he knew how to appeal to the Han court.
Very much so. He understood their values, their strategic concerns, and the urgency of the opportunity.
How did the Empress Dowager react to this proposal?
She consulted Geng Bing, who was the commander of the guards, basically head of national security.
And Geng Bing was supportive.
Yes. He saw it as a great opportunity, referencing Emperor Wu's past campaigns and pointing out how weak and divided the Northern Xiongnu were right now. Favorable circumstances.
And the Empress Dowager saw this as a chance for Dou Xian.
It seems so. A way for her brother to redeem himself through a major military victory. She leaned towards approving the campaign.
But not everyone was on board.
Definitely not. An official named Song Yi submitted a really strong argument against the campaign.
What was his reasoning?
Very pragmatic. He argued that historically, wars with the Xiongnu cost far more than they were worth. He even dismissed the usual spoils fur coats, tough jerky, sour yogurt as basically useless.
Huh. Not exactly worth bankrupting the state for.
That was his point. He reminded the court of Emperor Guangwu's successful policy, pacifying the Xiongnu, supporting those who surrendered. That approach had brought decades of peace.
So diplomacy and management over war.
Yes. And he also pointed out the rise of another group, the Xianbei, who were already fighting the Northern Xiongnu. Why not let them weaken each other?
Let your enemies fight it out.
Exactly. Song Yi also suggested that the Northern Xiongnu were already moving west. Maybe they could be encouraged to become a vassal state from afar, which would be a greater achievement than a costly war.
So his core message was, don't waste money and lives on this?
Precisely. Don't drain the treasury and exhaust the army for something that might not even yield lasting benefits.
Those sound like pretty compelling arguments.
They do. But there was also that long-standing ambition among Han rulers to finally crush the Xiongnu threat, a historical desire for glory.
And maybe the Empress Dowager wanted a big history-making achievement for her regency.
That seems likely. Ambition played a role.
Yeah.
In the end, she overruled Song Yi and the other critics.
She authorized the campaign.
Yes. And crucially, she appointed Dou Xian as general of chariots and cavalry to lead it, with Geng Bing as his deputy. This was his shot at redemption.
So, despite everything, the tyranny, the murder, the court opposition, he gets command of this massive expedition.
He does. And whatever his personal flaws, the sources agree he was a capable military leader.
And this campaign leads to the inscription at Yanran.
That's the one. A military achievement that gets mentioned in the same breath as Wei Qing and Hua Kim's famous victories. Even though, as the source notes, many high officials still saw the whole thing as Dou Xian just chasing personal glory at the state's expense. Their objections were ignored.
So what happened in the campaign itself? It was 89 AD.
Yes. A huge combined force, the text mentions 8,000 elite Han cavalry and 30,000 southern Xiongnu riders, meeting up way out in outer Mongolia. Dou Xian then took 10,000 elite troops and hit the northern Xiongnu hard.
And it worked.
decisively, a major Han victory. The Northern Xiongnu were scattered, their Qianyu fled.
Did Dou Xian stop there?
No, he pursued them relentlessly deep into the steppe, all the way to Uez Lake in modern Mongolia.
Wow. How decisive was the victory in terms of numbers?
The numbers are pretty staggering. Over 13,000 Northern Xiongnu killed, including nobles, over 1 million livestock captured, and 81 tribes surrendered. That was over 200,000 people switching allegiance.
A massive blow to the Northern Xiongnu.
Absolutely devastating for them.
And then came the inscription.
Yes. Dou Xian and Gang Bing climbed Mount Yanran, that's in the Qonghai Mountains today, over 1,500 kilometers from the Han frontier. And there, they had a stone inscribed.
What does it say?
It was an inscription honoring the power and virtue of the Han Dynasty. And the text itself was written by Ban Gu.
Ban Gu, the famous historian, brother of Ban Chao, the general.
The very same. Having him write it added immense prestige.
And this inscription at Yanran became famous.
Hugely famous. It became an iconic symbol of military triumph in Chinese history. It pops up in later poetry, like in the Song Dynasty, often mentioned alongside Wei Qing and Hu Qubing's deeds at Mount Langjiaxu. The source even quotes a Liu Yu poem referencing it.
So militarily, mission accomplished, redemption achieved.
From his perspective, yes. He needed this win to erase the stain of the Liu Cheng assassination. And the Empress Dowager gave him that chance, despite all the opposition. He certainly secured his military reputation.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? There were consequences.
Huge, unforeseen, long-term consequences. This is where Dou Xian's victory has echoes that ripple far beyond the Han Dynasty.
What kind of consequences?
Well, crushing the Northern Xiongnu like that created a massive power vacuum on the northern steppes.
And someone else moved in.
Exactly. The Xianbei people, who Song Yi had mentioned earlier, they moved into the territory the Northern Xiongnu used to dominate.
Okay.
And the Xianbei expansion put pressure on other groups, including the Southern Xiongnu, who had helped the Han and their allies. Many of these groups were pushed south, migrating into Han territory over time.
Migrating into China.
Yes. And historians see this large-scale southward migration as one of the major starting points, or at least a huge contributing factor, to what's later called the Five Barbarians Invasion, a period of major upheaval and conflict in Chinese history centuries later.
So Dou Xian's victory indirectly helped set the stage for future invasions of China.
It looks that way. It fundamentally changed the dynamic on the northern frontier. But the ripples went even further.
Further than China?
Much further. The defeated Northern Xiongnu didn't just disappear. They migrated westward, across Eurasia.
The Huns.
That's the theory many historians subscribe to, that these migrating Xiongnu groups eventually became known as the Huns in Europe. Their westward movement displaced other peoples, creating instability across Central Asia and Eastern Europe.
Which ultimately put pressure on
the Roman Empire. Some historians argued this massive chain reaction, starting with Dou Xian's victory, contributed significantly to the Völkerwanderung, the migration period in Europe, and played a part in the eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire.
That's mind-blowing. A campaign in Mongolia having ripple effects that reach all the way to Rome, centuries later.
It's an incredible example of historical interconnectedness, isn't it? How actions in one part of the world can trigger consequences thousands of miles away and long into the future.
So back to Dou Xian. His military success was undeniable. It saved him from punishment by the Empress Dowager, right?
Yes, the victory gave him the political cover he needed. His reputation as a general was secured, at least temporarily overshadowing his crimes.
But, as we discussed, it didn't guarantee him a place alongside Wei Qing and Hu Qubing in popular memory.
No. Military success is one thing, but a lasting positive legacy is another.
So when we try to sum up Dou Xian, it's incredibly complex.
Absolutely. A tangled legacy.
On one hand, you have this genuinely brilliant military commander. He delivers major victories for the Han Dynasty, achieves something monumental with the Yanran inscription. He earns his place in the military annals.
That part is undeniable. His military competence and the scale of his victory are clear from the sources.
But on the other hand, you have this deeply flawed individual. The tyranny, the abuse of power, the cruelty, the assassination.
And that side of him seems to have really tarnished his memory. Unlike Wei Qing and Hu Qubing, who were remembered primarily as loyal heroes, Dou Xian's story is inseparable from his personal failings and ruthlessness.
That negative narrative, his character flaws, they seem to have overshadowed the battlefield glory in the long run.
It certainly seems that way. His disregard for authority, the violence, It likely played a huge role in why he isn't celebrated in the same way. Character matters in historical memory, not just accomplishments.
And then layered on top of all that are those staggering, unintended global consequences of his biggest triumph. That westward migration, the Xianbai, the ripple effect towards Rome.
It just adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? A reminder that history unfolds in ways no one at the time could possibly predict. His actions had consequences far beyond what he or the Empress Dowager or even Song Yi could have imagined.
It really makes you think. So maybe the question for you listening to this is, how do we weigh these different parts of a historical figure? The triumphs versus the failures, the achievements versus the character.
Yeah, what ultimately shapes how someone is remembered? Is it just the big victories? Or is it the moral dimension, the personal conduct, the unforeseen consequences that end up defining their place in history?
It's certainly not simple. Dou Xian's story shows just how complicated judging the past and the figures who shaped it can really be. Definitely something to mull over.